Elvis was in the middle of Can't Help Falling in Love when something in the audience made him stop mid-verse and break down crying in front of 15,000 people. What he saw in the fifth row would change the final years of his life forever. It was August 12, 1973, at the Las Vegas Hilton. The crowd was electric, hanging on every word. He'd already worked them into a frenzy with Burning Love and Hound Dog, and now he was settling into the slower part of his set. Elvis was halfway through the song when his eyes drifted to the fifth row. An elderly woman with silver hair sat there, wearing a simple blue dress. She looked to be in her 70s, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Most performers wouldn't have noticed her among the sea of faces, but something about this woman stopped Elvis cold. The recognition hit him like a physical blow. Those eyes, that gentle smile, the way she sat so properly with perfect posture. Elvis's voice cracked as he tried to continue the song, but the words wouldn't come. His hand holding the microphone began to shake, and then, to the shock of everyone in that arena, tears started streaming down the face of the king of rock and roll. The band, confused by Elvis's sudden emotional breakdown, gradually stopped playing. 15,000 people sat in stunned silence, watching their idol struggle to compose himself on stage. Elvis walked to the edge of the stage, wiping his eyes, trying to see through the bright lights to confirm what his heart already knew. "Mrs. Olsen?" Elvis called out, his voice barely above a whisper but carried clearly through the arena's sound system. "Margaret Olsson, is that really you?" The elderly woman's face lit up with the same warm smile that had comforted a scared little boy 30 years earlier. She raised her hand slightly and nodded. "Hello, Elvis," she called back, her voice strong despite her age. "It's been a long time." What happened next had never occurred in the history of Lassie. Vegas entertainment. Elvis set down his microphone, walked off the stage, and disappeared into the wings, leaving 15,000 people in complete bewilderment. Backstage, he was moving with a purpose that surprised everyone in his crew. "Joe," he said to Joe Esposito, his road manager, tears still flowing freely. "I need you to get that woman from the fifth row, the lady in the blue dress. Bring her backstage, now." "Elvis, we're in the middle of a show," Joe protested. "We can't just—" "That woman changed my life," Elvis interrupted, his voice thick with emotion. "She's the reason I'm standing on this stage. Get her, now." To understand why Elvis Presley, at the height of his Las Vegas success, would stop his show for an elderly schoolteacher, we have to go back 30 years to a small town called Tupelo, Mississippi, and a scared 8-year-old boy who believed he was worthless. In 1943, Elvis Presley was not a king. He was a painfully shy child living in a 2-room house with his parents, Vernon and Gladys. The family was desperately poor, moving from rental to rental. His father worked sporadically, his mother took in washing. School was a nightmare. His family's poverty was obvious to everyone. He wore patched clothes, ate biscuit lunches, and endured merciless teasing from classmates who called him Mama's boy. But the worst part wasn't the teasing, it was how most teachers treated him. They saw a poor kid and wrote him off. They spoke to him like he was stupid, expected nothing, made it clear they believed he would never amount to anything. By age 8, Elvis had internalized this message. He believed he was worthless. Then, Margaret Olsson became his 3rd-grade teacher. Mrs. Olsen was different. She was from Minnesota, had come south to teach, because she believed every child deserved a chance. She was in her early 40s, unmarried, dedicated to education. She noticed Elvis from day one, not because he was disruptive, but because he seemed to carry the weight of the world on his shoulders. She saw something in Elvis that no one else had seen. She saw potential. While other teachers spoke down to him, Mrs. Olsen spoke to Elvis with the same respect she gave every other student. When the other children laughed at his stutter, she would quietly correct them and encourage Elvis to keep speaking. When he couldn't afford school supplies, she would find extra pencils and paper that happened to be exactly what he needed. But most importantly, Mrs. Olsen noticed that Elvis had a voice. Not just his speaking voice, which was soft and musical even as a child, but something deeper. She noticed how he hummed to himself while working, how he seemed to find rhythm in everything around him. During music class, while the other children sang in flat, off-key voices, Elvis sang with a natural ability that was remarkable for someone so young. One afternoon in November of 1943, Mrs. Olsen asked Elvis to stay after his class. The other children filed out, many of them shooting him sympathetic looks, assuming he was in trouble. Elvis sat at his desk expecting the worst. Instead, Mrs. Olsen pulled up a chair beside him and sat down. "Elvis," she said gently, "I want you to sing something for me." Elvis looked at her in confusion. "Ma'am, I've heard you humming, and I've noticed your voice during music class. You have something special. I'd like to hear you sing by yourself." Elvis was terrified. No one had ever asked him to perform anything before. No one had ever suggested he was good at anything. But something about Mrs. Olsen's gentle encouragement made him feel safe. He sang "Old Shep," a song about a boy and his dog that his mother had taught him. His voice, pure and clear, filled the empty classroom. When he finished, Mrs. Olsen had tears in her eyes. "Elvis," she said quietly, "you're going to be something special someday. That voice of yours is a gift from God." For 8-year-old Elvis Presley, those words were like sunlight breaking through clouds. No adult had ever told him he was good at anything. No one had ever suggested he had a gift. No one had ever told him he would be something special. From that day forward, Mrs. Olsen became Elvis's champion. She encouraged him to sing in the school's Christmas program. She praised his voice in front of the other students, helping to change how they saw him. She recommended him for the school talent show. Most importantly, she treated him like he mattered. Mrs. Olsen did something else crucial to Elvis's development. She began teaching him about different types of music. She brought records from home, classical, folk, blues recordings. She explained that music was universal, that it could bring people together regardless of background. One day, she brought in a record by blues singer Arthur Crudup. Elvis had never heard anything like it, the raw emotion, the way Crudup poured his heart through the music. Mrs. Olsen noticed Elvis's fascination. "Music doesn't see color, Elvis," she told him. "It doesn't see poor or rich. It just sees truth and feeling. You have both of those in your voice." The impact of Mrs. Olsen's belief in Elvis extended far beyond music. For the first time in his life, he began to believe that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't worthless. Maybe his family's poverty didn't define his potential. Maybe he could be something more than what everyone expected. When Elvis was struggling with reading, Mrs. Olsen stayed after school to help him. When other children excluded him from games at recess, she made sure he had something meaningful to do. When he came to school obviously hungry, she would forget her lunch and share it with him, making it seem like an accident so he wouldn't feel like charity. But perhaps most importantly, Mrs. Olsen taught Elvis about kindness and dignity. She showed him how to treat others with respect regardless of their circumstances. She modeled the kind of grace under pressure that would later become one of Elvis's most admired qualities. By the end of 3rd grade, Elvis Presley had been transformed. The shy, stuttering boy who believed he was worthless had become a child with confidence and hope. He still faced the same poverty, the same challenging home circumstances, but now he had something that couldn't be taken away from him, the knowledge that someone believed in him. When the school year ended, Mrs. Olsen pulled Elvis aside one last time. She had accepted a teaching position in another state and wouldn't be returning to Lawn Elementary. "Elvis," she said, "I want you to remember something. No matter what happens in your life, no matter how difficult things get, you have a special gift. Don't let anyone convince you that you're not important, because you are. Don't let anyone tell you that you can't achieve your dreams, because you can. Promise me you'll remember that." Elvis, now 9 years old and fighting back tears, promised her he would never forget. Mrs. Olsen reached into her desk and pulled out a small notebook. "I want you to have this," she said. "Whenever you feel discouraged, I want you to write down your feelings. And whenever you feel hopeful, write down your dreams. Someday you're going to look back on this and remember how far you've come." Elvis took the notebook, clutching it like the treasure it was. That notebook would travel with him for years, through the lean times, through the early days of his music career, through his first recordings at Sun Studio. As Mrs. Olsen walked out of the classroom for the last time, she turned back to Elvis. "Take care of that voice, Elvis Presley. The world needs to hear it." Those were the last words Elvis heard from Margaret Olsson for 30 years. The years that followed saw Elvis's transformation from shy boy to global icon. Through Sun Records, Army service, movies, and his return to live performance, Mrs. Olson's words stayed with him. The notebook she gave him remained precious. During difficult times, he would write in it, remembering her belief during struggles with fame, drugs, and doubt. But as years passed, the specific memory of Mrs. Olson faded. The scared little boy was buried under sequined jumpsuits and screaming fans. By 1973, Elvis was at both the peak and valley of his career. His Las Vegas residencies were hugely successful, but he was increasingly isolated by fame. He struggled with health problems, relationship difficulties, and growing dependence on prescription medications. The man who had once been that hopeful boy now sometimes wondered if his life had real meaning beyond entertainment. And then Margaret Olsson walked into his Las Vegas show. Margaret was now 73 years old. She had spent 40 years teaching, touching hundreds of lives, but never forgot the shy boy with the remarkable voice. She had followed Elvis's career from a distance, watching with pride and sometimes concern as he became a global icon. She had retired in 1968 and moved to Las Vegas to be near her sister. She had never attended Elvis's shows, feeling her memories were precious enough. But this evening, her sister convinced her to come. "He's not just an entertainer, Margaret," her sister had said. "He's still that boy you believed in. Maybe he needs to know that someone remembers." Mrs. Olson had no intention of making herself known to Elvis. She simply wanted to see what the shy child with the beautiful voice had become. She bought a ticket in the middle section, far enough back that she wouldn't draw attention, close enough that she could see the man that little Elvis had grown into. What she saw broke her heart. Yes, Elvis was magnificent on stage. His voice was even more powerful than she had imagined it would become. His presence was commanding, electric, but she could see something else, a loneliness, a sadness that reminded her of that 8-year-old boy who had felt worthless. When Elvis's eyes met hers during Can't Help Falling in Love, 30 years collapsed in an instant. She saw recognition flash across his face, followed immediately by an emotion she hadn't seen since he was a child: vulnerability. Within minutes, security was escorting Mrs. Olson backstage. She walked through the maze of corridors and dressing rooms, past the entourage and the hangers-on to where Elvis was waiting. When she saw him up close, out of the stage lights, she saw not the king of rock and roll, but the little boy she had taught to believe in himself. Elvis didn't say a word at first. He just walked over to this woman who had changed his life and hugged her like a child hugging his grandmother. For several minutes, they simply held each other while the most famous man in the world cried like he hadn't cried since childhood. "Mrs. Olson," Elvis finally whispered, "I never forgot what you told me. I never forgot." "I know you didn't, Elvis," she replied, her own voice thick with emotion. "I can hear it in your voice when you sing. That little boy is still in there." They talked for 2 hours. Elvis told her about the notebook, about how he had carried her words with him through every challenge, every triumph, every moment of doubt. He told her about the times when he had wanted to give up, when the pressure and the fame had seemed too much, and how he had remembered her belief in him. Mrs. Olson listened with the same patience and wisdom she had shown in that third-grade classroom 30 years earlier. She told Elvis about the hundreds of students she had taught over the years, about the letters she had received from children whose lives had been changed by encouragement and belief. "But you, Elvis," she said, "you were special from the very beginning, not because of your voice, though that was remarkable. You were special because of your heart. You had compassion for others even when you were hurting. You had kindness even when others weren't kind to you. That's what made you special then. And that's what makes you special now." Then Mrs. Olson said something that would haunt Elvis for the rest of his life. "Elvis, I want you to remember that little boy I taught. I want you to remember what it felt like to believe in possibilities. You've achieved everything the child dreamed of and more. But don't lose the heart that made those dreams worth achieving." She paused, studying his face with the same care she had shown when he was 8 years old. "Promise me something, Elvis. Promise me that you'll take care of yourself. That voice, that heart, they're still gifts. Don't waste them," Elvis promised, though both of them knew how difficult that promise would be to keep. When it came time for Mrs. Olson to leave, Elvis had one last request. "Would you come back tomorrow night? Would you let me sing something just for you?" The next evening, Margaret Olsson sat in the front row as Elvis dedicated his entire performance to her. He sang the same songs he had sung the night before, but something was different. There was a lightness to his voice, a joy that hadn't been there in months. He sang Old Shep, the same song he had sung for her in that empty classroom 30 years earlier. When he finished, Elvis looked directly at Mrs. Olsen and said into the microphone, "Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to meet the woman who taught me to believe in myself, Mrs. Margaret Olsson, my third-grade teacher and the person who changed my life." The audience gave her a standing ovation that lasted 5 minutes. But more importantly, Elvis had publicly acknowledged the debt he owed to the woman who had seen potential in a scared little boy when no one else would. Mrs. Olsen continued to attend Elvis's Las Vegas shows whenever she could over the next few years. She became a regular backstage visitor, someone Elvis could talk to about his childhood, his fears, his hopes for the future. She was one of the few people in his life who had known him before he was famous, who could remind him of who he had been before the world told him who he was supposed to be. In her presence, Elvis could be that 8-year-old boy again. Not the frightened, worthless child he had been before meeting her, but the hopeful, talented child she had helped him become. She reminded him that his success wasn't just about talent or luck or timing. It was about the belief that one person had shown in him at exactly the moment when he needed it most. When Elvis died in August of 1977, Margaret Olsson was one of the mourners at Graceland. Among his possessions, she found that notebook she had given him 30 years earlier. It was filled with his thoughts, his dreams, his fears, and on the first page, written in a child's careful handwriting, were the words, "Mrs. Olsen says I am special." The story of Elvis and Mrs. Olsen reminds us that we never know how our words might change someone's life. A teacher's belief in a struggling child, expressed at the right moment, helped create one of the most influential artists in history. But more than that, it gave a little boy strength to believe in himself when no one else would. Sometimes the most important thing we can do is see potential where others see only problems. Sometimes the greatest gift we can give is belief when there seems nothing to believe in. And sometimes, 30 years later, that belief comes full circle in the most beautiful way imaginable. Margaret Olsson died peacefully in 1982 at age 82. At her funeral, the church was filled with former students whose lives she had touched, but the flowers that covered her casket came from Graceland with a card that read, "Thank you for believing in a little boy with a dream. Elvis Aaron Presley."